Hi everyone! Today we're making a Tiana-inspired capelet. This is my second video of my Disney Princess series. In the last video I made a Cinderella capelet, which I will link somewhere here on the screen in case you've missed it. Now Tiana wears a few different outfits in The Princess and the Frog. We first see her in her diner's outfits. She has a mustard yellow one and a green one. And then there's the green and brown Renaissance dress, a flapper dress in another scene, the blue dress, the wedding dress, but of course the most iconic Tiana dress is the green ball gown, and that's the one I'm going with. It has so many fun elements I can work with. I love all the leaf shapes and the flower. I definitely want that to be the centerpiece on my capelet, so let's start with some sketching. I have already got the fabric I want to use. It's a green wool fabric, sort of like the shade, maybe just a little bit darker. I'm going to paste in the capelet drawing that I made in the previous video for Cinderella, because the neckline and the upper shoulder part will be taken from that pattern, and then the bottom part of the capelet I will want to modify. So here's the front piece. And then I'll also bring in the back piece. So we're going to use these two as our base. I'm going to go ahead and erase the bottom section, and I'll do the same for the back piece. Now, when I look at the gown, the most prominent element here is all these leaf shapes. She has them on the bodice at the neckline, and she also has them on the skirt. They almost appear like they are individual leaves that are linked together at the waist, and they're also layered. There's the green layer on the top and then the creamy yellow layer under that, and I really like how they overlapped, so that's definitely something I want to have on the capelet. I'm going to try and add maybe 2 or 3 shapes on the front, on each side. I guess 3 might be too many actually, because then the leaves would have to be a bit smaller than I would like. So I might go with just 2. This looks better to me because I also want to have an overlapping effect, and I'll be adding bottom layer shapes underneath. And let's do the same on the other side. On the back, I want the same shapes, and I'll also be adding bottom layers. For my lining, I have chosen a creamy yellow lining fabric, kind of like that. The lining fabric will only partly be seen in some parts. It might be peeking out on the edges. Then we have the flower. I want the flower somewhere on the front, and I think it would work nicely as a closure for the front of the capelet instead of a tie or a button. The flower will be embroidered by hand, most likely as a separate piece. Tiana's flower piece has this curved green stem that extends all the way down, and then the flower itself will be a creamy yellow. I do want it to be a prominent size. It has these long leaves underneath. I'll be making 4 of them. Then we have a couple more leaves dangling down from the stem. I think I might try and attach 2 or 3 embroidered leaves to the stem. So this is what I've come up with so far. There may be some changes along the way, but first we need to create a pattern. I've laid down a basic cape pattern to use as my base, just so I have my neckline measurements right, and then the rest of the capelet pattern will need to be drawn by hand. I'm going to trace the shape as it is, and then I'll start incorporating my leaves. finally have my main front piece pattern, and this will be the bottom shape layered underneath. And this is my back piece pattern, which will be cut on fold. Before I do any sewing, I need to first get my embroidery work done. This is where the flower should sit and work as our closure. I'll be starting with the stem first. I'm marking my seam allowance just to make sure I don't accidentally extend my embroidery stitches into the seam allowance. I'm just going to roughly draw out the shape of the curved stem. To create my stem, I'm going to use a trailing method, common method used in whitework embroidery. You basically have a few core threads that are then wrapped by an outer thread. The core threads will not be visible, so for those I'm going to be using some of my cheap, relatively lower quality cotton threads. I'm just going to pick out a few green shades and then I'll choose one that is closest to the colour of the outer thread I'll be using. Trailing is a very useful stitch. It gives a nice shiny surface and the width can be adjusted according to the number of core threads you use. I'll run my threads in a needle and I'm going to take the needle up through the fabric and pull it through. Make sure I have enough length to cover the shape. Then I'll grab my outer thread. This is a DMC pearl cotton. The stitch should be at right angles to the line. I'm pulling fairly tightly on the first few stitches and trying to maintain some tension after each stitch. So, for each subsequent stitch, you bring the needle up from underneath the core threads and take it down underneath them. The stitches should be as close together as you can manage, so as not to let any of the core threads show through. As you turn a corner, you change the angle of the stitches so they stay at right angles to the line at all times. You can see how it gives a really nice and shiny 3D surface. I'm now done with the stem. Next, I'll be making my flower and leaves. This is the fabric I'll be using for the flower. And this is an organza that I'll be using for the leaves. For my flower petals, I'm making wired fabric slips. A wired fabric slip is fairly time-consuming to make, but it's worth the effort if you want to create dimension. I've cut out my wire. I'm laying it down on the fabric, and I'm going to couch over the wire with my thread. I'm using 2 strands of thread here. Now that I have my wire entirely covered, I can start my second layer. I'm working closed buttonhole stitches over the couched edge. With each stitch, I take the needle down inside the shape and bring it up through the loop outside the shape. And finally, I'm adding some internal details using lines of double running stitch. For my leaves, I'm doing the exact same, except here I'm working with organza fabric, which I think will look great later on top of the green capelet piece. It's 12 days later now and I have all of my petals and leaves ready. I'm going to cut all the pieces out, and then one last step before I can assemble my flower. I'll have to make my flower pistil. For the pistil, I've done some French knots, and now I'm adding some beads between the knots. Once I'm done with this, I can then assemble all of the pieces together to create a stem with attached leaves. And there we have our flower ready. You can kind of shape and mould the petals and leaves however you like. I'm going to attach this brooch pin to the base of the flower, and so this is what we'll use as our capelet closure. Now we can start sewing the capelet itself. I've placed the back capelet piece right side facing up and aligned the front capelet main pieces to the shoulders, right sides together, and I'm just going to attach them together on the sides. After that, I'll press the seam allowances towards the back of the capelet. I'll repeat the same steps for my lining pieces, and then once the seams are finished, I will top stitch the seam allowance to the back. We can now attach the lining to the main capelet piece. I'm placing the lining on top of the main piece, right sides together, pin them in place and sew. I'm also leaving a small opening unsewn at the neckline so that we can later turn the capelet right side out. Before I put everything together, I need to prepare the bottom layer leaf pieces. I'm sewing each piece with a lining fabric, right sides together, leaving a small opening, and then I can turn it right side out. We are all set now. All I need to do is assemble all of the pieces and pin them together to prepare for the last stitch, which is a top stitch around the entire capelet. And we're done. Let me know what you think. I might be making a capelet for Belle in the next video, or I might do Snow White, so stay tuned for that.